Welcome to On My Way to Wealth, the podcast where busy Gen Xers can learn financial tips as they navigate life on their way to wealth. And now, please join your host, Luis Rosa.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of On My Way to Wealth. My name is Luis, and I'm your host. I hope everybody's doing well. I want to thank you for tuning in. And today I want to talk to you about the economy reopening. All right. As of the recording of this podcast, I hear many states already opening back up. Restaurants are accepting people to even eat indoors. Limited capacity, but I know that's going to continue to get better. More and more vaccines are coming out. People are going back to work. Unemployment claims are going down. Things seem to be moving in the right direction. So I wanted to talk about, so now what? But before we get into that, I want to talk about what have we learned from the pandemic from a financial standpoint. And then we can talk about what should we do, what can we do going forward in terms of our finances. So what have we learned? I'm sitting here reflecting on the past year. It's been pretty much just slightly over a year since this whole thing came out with COVID and the lockdowns and all that. And I was just kind of like reflecting, what are some of the things that we can take away? I'm pretty big on figuring out what happened and then what are the lessons, right, from those things. So let's get right into it. What have we learned from this pandemic? One thing I noticed is how adaptable and resilient we are. This thing took the world by storm and it put certain people's lives upside down. Or even if you weren't infected by the virus, even if you did not have a family member that died from it, your life drastically changed. I've seen people where they had to end up working from home, myself included. I saw people that all of a sudden lost their childcare and they had to homeschool. That's another thing. So not only did they lose the childcare, they also had to become teachers all of a sudden. And they were doing homeschooling. They were also working at the same time, taking care of the kids. It was a lot. So kudos to you, obviously, for making it through this. This too shall pass, as they say. So we are very adaptable, very resilient. And what are some of the things that we changed throughout? I was looking at it from a financial planner angle, just like money-wise. I know a lot of people who are actually better off financially after this pandemic occurred for many, many reasons. Some people continue to get paid and were able to just continue to work from home. So they were still making the same amount of money. Now, what happened was their finances drastically changed because they weren't going anywhere, and at the same time, they were able to get some relief, whether it was like mortgage forbearance, for example. So maybe their lender just told them, hey, we're going to skip your mortgage payments for the next 3 months. Maybe their student loans, if they were federal, got put on deferment for a year or so. Some private lenders also did that with credit card companies, car payments, you name it. A lot of people got a lot of relief by not having to make certain payments or getting a reduced payment, and at the same time continue to make the same money that we're making before. Some people, depending on what type of job you do, ended up making even more money. I have clients that are in the medical field that were working overtime and so on. So that combination for a lot of people, in addition to stimulus payments, I can't forget about those, resulted in a huge increase in people's cash flow, combined with the fact that they just weren't doing anything. There were no more weddings to go to, no more gatherings, no more birthday parties, things of that sort that normally you would spend money on, not just on the gifts, but also on going to the event itself. Had to do your hair, had to get clothes, you had to, buy the gift and so on and so forth. So I've been having these conversations like, what can we do going forward based on those lessons that we learned? So one thing is, for example, if you're in that situation where you were still making the same money you were making before, but at the same time, you now have been able to save a lot more than you normally were, can you take that same discipline, because in this case, you were forced to do it, but now that you've been doing it for about a year, are you able to take some of that discipline that you've learned? And I don't mean discipline in a bad way. Discipline is just that mindset. Can you apply that going forward and say, I've been able to, for an entire year, not be spending money on all these social events that I normally would, going out to eat, etc. Not saying that you shouldn't do that at all, but can you take some of what you've learned from that behavior and apply it going forward and say, I'm going to continue to eat out less. I'm going to continue to spend less money shopping, traveling. That was a major one, right? And then what can I do with this money going forward? A lot of people were able to get rid of debt. A lot of people were able to increase their savings, which is huge, right? And work towards those goals. So how can we change that, right? Going forward is just going back to that mindset, saying, look, we were forced to do this. Now things are opening back up. Can I use some of what I've learned, some of that discipline, and just apply it going forward? So let's talk about what the world ahead looks like. One thing is, for me, that I learned is, just looking at certain people and the troubles that they went through when everything hit. Some that were unfortunate enough to either lose jobs or have reduced pay, was the importance of having an emergency savings. This is something that you probably hear me preach all the time. It's like money 101. But the pandemic, I feel like, highlighted the need for you to have an emergency savings first before you do anything else. The reason for that is because we realize that although, yes, we got a lot of help by maybe our lender told us not to pay the mortgage for a couple of months. Maybe we got a stimulus payment. Maybe we got unemployment. There were also a lot of delays with a lot of these things. I know people who filed for unemployment, but they weren't able to get it for quite a bit. Eventually, yes, they did get a lump sum and got that retro check. Some people didn't get their stimulus payments. They had to wait until they filed their tax return in order to actually qualify, or they just didn't qualify based on their 2019 income. 2020, they did because they had less income and now they claim the credit, but they needed the money at the time, right? So the main thing is, yes, there might be assistance from government programs and private lenders, et cetera, but you want to make sure that you take care of yourself so you have enough to cover yourself until all these other things kick in if you end up needing them. You don't want to have to count on these things. So I always tell people to have, at a very minimum, 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. And I want to make a clarification. I say worth of expenses, not worth your salary, because you don't spend your entire salary if you're not working. I'm talking about bare minimum, what you need to live on. You might bring home $5,000 a month, but maybe you don't need $5,000 a month because you're also putting money into 401ks, you're spending money traveling to work, commuting, and so on and so forth. I'm talking about bare minimum. What do you need to pay your cost of living, your standard cost of living? Take that. Usually tell people 3 to 6 months. This pandemic has made it where, if you could push for a year, by all means, go do that. Because think about it this way. If you have 6 months, 9 months, a year worth of your personal living expenses, and then something else like this happens, and it doesn't have to be a pandemic. It could be anything. It could be a disability that's short term. Sometimes you're in short-term disability. Maybe you get a percentage of your pay. Maybe you don't, depending on your employer and all that. How are you going to pay your bills? You don't want to have to be dependent on programs like stimulus payments and unemployment and so on. That's great that they're there, but you don't want to have to count on that. So 3 to 6 months at a bare minimum, 6 months to a year, if you could do it, I would highly recommend that you push for that in terms of emergency savings. And you may already have achieved that just by the fact that you were still making money and not spending much during the pandemic. So that's one thing to consider. Now, let's say you did achieve that goal. What do I do with the money going forward that I still have as positive cash flow? And now I'm a new person. I already know that I could do this. I don't have to go out every single weekend and so on and so forth. So what do I do with my excess cash flow? Well, there's certain things to take advantage of. For example, as of the recording of this podcast, the tax filing deadline has been extended to May 17th. Now, why do I mention that? Because one thing that follows the tax filing deadline is the deadline to contribute things like a Roth IRA for the prior year. So meaning May 17, 2021 is the deadline for you to contribute towards an IRA, whether it's a traditional or a Roth IRA for tax year 2020. So you have an additional amount of time to figure out if this would be a good strategy for you. So I highly recommend that you speak to somebody like a certified financial planning professional. But I can tell you that if you have your 6 months reserves already and you feel comfortable with that, and then you have extra income, whether it's another stimulus payment coming or a tax refund, et cetera, highly consider opening up or contributing to an IRA. There are some income limitations, so the Roth IRA has a much larger income limitation and something for you to look at. That's one thing where you can get started on that, maxing that bad boy out. What else can we do? What about your 401k at work? Are you able to up your contribution? Another thing that you could do, let's say you might have accumulated a significant amount of money over the pandemic. One thing you could do is you can continue to spend some of the money from the savings that you have if they exceed your emergency savings and increase your 401k contribution. So look at the IRAs first to see if those make sense. Then you can also increase your 401k contributions and live off of the money that you have saved. So that could be another strategy. Maybe you were close to maxing out your 401k and now you're able to do that. Just increase the amount that comes out of your paycheck and go into your 401k, especially if your employer offers a Roth 401k, which is more and more common nowadays. The Roth 401k gives you an option to put more than 3 times what you could in a Roth IRA, and there are no income limitations, so that is an excellent method for you to increase your retirement savings. What else can we do? 401ks, IRAs. What about investing in general? One thing that we also saw, I think, I don't know if it was a result of the pandemic or not, but it happened during the pandemic, was this really big boost in investing in individual stocks. I'm sure you've seen it all throughout the internet and in the news, how there was, all these companies that people were investing in, not based on fundamentals. It was just based on hype. And did some people make money? Absolutely, yes. Now, it doesn't mean that, I would say most people did not, and, I do a lot of people's tax returns and I've gotten their 1099 tax forms, and a lot of them were part of this hype, buying and selling individual stocks. I haven't seen one person yet who made a significant amount of money. Not even enough to buy a car or nothing, some people made a couple $100 maybe, so they spent all that time just buying and selling all these individual stocks, just trading, probably giving themselves anxiety day in and day out. And at the end of the day, for what? So I wanted to bring that up because sound investing is based on fundamentals. It's not based on just hype, so another thing to consider, yes, if you have some extra cash and you wanted to buy some individual stocks, there's definitely nothing wrong with that. But when you have your long-term goals that you have for retirement, or you have different goals for the future, like buying a home or sending your kids to college, buying those individual stocks like you've seen lately happen is more of a lot based on hype, not really fundamental. So it's more of a fad, So that's another thing to consider is what is my investment strategy going to be going forward? Should I be maxing out my 401k? Should I be maxing out a Roth IRA? Should I be putting money in a brokerage account? Should I be doing a combination of all those things? And obviously everybody's situation is going to be different, but I feel like there's a lot of stuff here that you can take as lessons from the pandemic and then use those lessons to then mold your life going forward in a more positive direction, in a vision that you have. I think a lot of us have been given an opportunity here that we otherwise wouldn't have had. So take advantage of those. And like I said, it's super important. If you don't know where to start, reach out to a certified financial planning professional. You can sit down, go over your budget, go over your numbers, go over your goals, and then develop a plan for you that makes sense. And also that is based on your values, right? Because not everybody is going to have the same goals. Some people want to have a big travel budget. Some people would rather, drive not such a nice car, but they prefer to travel. Some people want to save just so that they can get out of debt sooner or retire sooner. So it's a lot of different ways that you can go about it. So make sure that when you do reach out to somebody, probably try to speak to 2-3 people until you find somebody that makes you feel comfortable, is going to understand where you're coming from, hear your needs, because it's not always all about saving the most amount of money. There's also got to be some balance there and some lifestyle into that, right? So I hope that those of you listening are in that situation where you have learned something from this pandemic. Maybe you got to save a lot of money. Maybe you got to get rid of some debt that you normally wouldn't have been able to. And now you have choice. Say, what do I do going forward? What is my strategy? So be sure that you don't fall into the trap of, oh, wow, the economy is opening, party time. Let's just right back where we were on full blast, right? Because, there's an opportunity here to change course and do a lot better than perhaps we were doing before. So thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate you. Financial Literacy Month. And this is a special episode for Financial Literacy Month. Be sure to continue to check out the On My Way to Wealth podcast, as well as onmywaytowealth.com. If you have any questions, please send me an email, luis@onmywaytowealth.com, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to On My Way to Wealth. If you have any questions, please send me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. The information provided here is for information and education purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of myself, unless otherwise specifically cited. Material presented is believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations are made by my firm or myself about other parties' information or accuracy or completeness. All information or ideas provided should be discussed in detail with a financial advisor, accountant, or legal counsel prior to implementation. Thank you.